I think one thing that I wish I had more awareness of when I was at sea was I wasn't really self-aware enough. I hadn't really got to that stage of how I really felt, and for a long time, and it did take me probably longer than it would now to realise that I was unhappy.
Hello and welcome to the Coming Ashore podcast. Each episode, we look to learn a little bit more about the maritime industry and the people who keep it running. My name is Nat, and sat opposite me this evening is one of my co-hosts, Will.
Hello.
And next to him is James.
Hello.
Today we are going to be interviewing Will to find out a little bit more about the Coming Ashore programme, as Will is a Coming Ashore mentor. Will, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Just to break the ice and get things rolling, can you tell me what your favourite breakfast item is?
My favourite breakfast item is, I would say, hash browns.
That's a solid answer.
That's a really good choice.
I love a hash brown.
Yeah, I just don't think you can go wrong, really. Like, I think everything else can be done like a bit not to your taste, but it's hard to mess up a hash brown because even if it doesn't like fully form, just hash it, and it can never be too brown. So, what more could you want?
They aren't good. We won't dive into what actually makes up a full English breakfast here.
No, that's for another day.
More pressing things to get on with. So start at the very beginning. How did you get into the maritime industry? Well,
so I'd gone through sort of traditional UK education, going down, do secondary school, you do GCSEs, went to college and did my A-levels, and at the time you did A2s at the end of your first year, and then ASs at the end of your first year, and then you did A2s at the end of your second year. And I got to the end of my first year. I was just doing my ASs. I was doing history, French, maths, and design technology, which I had phoned in massively because I decided I wanted to drop it quite early on. But I did okay, but I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do going forward, and they were starting to press me saying, you need to decide what you want to do when you finish because you've only got a year. And I was talking to my parents about it, and they said, well, you're not really sort of, I never know whether to take this as I never really know how to take this comment at all, actually. They said, you're not really that into reading, which probably, I don't know whether it's a comment on my ability to read or just, my preference, but they said, you're not really into sort of book learning, you're into more sort of talking to people and, doing things. So maybe going to university isn't for you, especially with the amount of debt you would rack up reading, which isn't really what you want to do anyway. So on the back burner, I was thinking about doing French and history at university, but decided that maybe to look into other things. And my stepdad, Bob, was a taxi driver at the time, and he used to take people from Southampton Airport to Wasatch Maritime College. And being a taxi driver, he talked to every single one of them and found out everything about their lives. So he'd heard about the cadetship through that, and basically the headlines that he turned around and told me were, you don't get any debt, you get paid while doing it, and you can go and work on a cruise ship potentially, because he knew that some people did that. And I think I've been on a cruise once before, and I thought, that might be quite nice. That might be quite a nice thing to do. So I kind of just fell into it. So we went down to an open day at Wasatch to meet the people who were offering out the roles, and and had a chat with a couple of people, and I knew pretty early actually that even though I wasn't sure or hadn't heard about the industry, I was only really interested in going into cruise ships. So I applied round every cruise ship company I could. And then Carnival were the first ones to reach out to me and offer me an interview day. And so I went along and fortunately passed the assessments and got offered a job on the day. So that was, a good day.
A very good day.
Yeah.
It sounds that you're very fortunate to kind of have that advice at the time. Do you still reflect on it going, that was the right choice at the time for me? Yeah,
I do, definitely. Look, I'm happy that I've moved ashore and sort of, I think that moving ashore when I did was the right choice for me. I will touch a bit now onto sort of where my career took me, but once I'd qualified, so after the 3-year cadetship, I only actually spent a year and a half as a qualified officer because I knew fairly quickly that being at sea wasn't right for me. It just wasn't the right environment. I liked being back at home. I didn't like having it feel like I had two lives, which at the time I did. I find that really tough. And, it always felt to me around me that the people who were there really did love it. And I was like, well, I don't feel that way. And I don't think it's quite right for me. So that hasn't answered your question at all. But what the place I was getting to is that even though I didn't spend that much time at sea once I qualified, I would still make the same choice again, because I think that the footing and the grounding that the training gave me and the experience in the workplace that it gave me early on and just the skills it's given me have set me up really well for moving on in my career. And also I didn't end up with £60,000 worth of university debt. So I was quite happy about that as well.
Solid money saving advice there.
Yeah. Call me Martin Lewis.
Yeah. The podcast is obviously as advanced as that. So you kind of told us how you got into the industry. Can you tell us about how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, so I did my cadetship with Carnival and went on to be a third officer. So I was cadet from 2014 to 2017.
I know.
Nat had the pleasure of meeting me on my first day, and I think we were in a lift. I remember it very vividly actually, because I think you were the first person I met, or that I can specifically remember meeting in a lift.
I clearly left you with a lasting impression.
Yeah, clearly. And probably because you were like the first deck officer I'd met on board as I was coming on as I had absolutely zero idea it was your like first trip as a qualified officer as well. I was just like, experienced person who knows what they're doing, and the shaking of your head,
continuously giving off that aura of make.
Yeah, exactly. We met there. Got trained by the very best, clearly, and then swiftly left the sea. No, so I gave it a couple of years and moved shoreside. So I actually took because I knew that I didn't want to be at sea anymore. I took a bit of a rogue move, and I had seen a lot of people get stuck when they were trying to move ashore by the fact that their what do you call it? What's the bit where you need to give people your notice period? That's it. Their notice period was 3 months, and their leave was 3 months.
We were searching for some really long, complicated, nautical, deep, dark term there.
No, this is about as good as my brain does, I'm afraid. So no, a lot of people I've seen get sort of stuck where they wanted to leave, but they had a leave period of 3 months and had a notice period of 3 months, and so they weren't really looking. They were looking for jobs when they got home, but then they couldn't do it because by the time they found a job, they then had to go back to sea, and it kind of wrecked it all. So I went, actually, I want to stop now, and I resigned so that my last day with the company was going to be my last day on board the ship. I didn't have a job lined up. I was fortunate in the fact that I'd worked too many days that year, so the company owed me some money. So I knew that I could survive at least for a couple of months whilst I found a job. And I could find I thought if not, I can find a job stacking shelves somewhere, doing whatever to tide me over. But yeah, I thought, look, I'm going to go out and try and find something to do, but because I know this isn't what I want to be doing. But during that 3-month period, a role came up shoreside as a shipboard emergency response specialist, understanding so you just needed to know how the emergency response plans worked on board, which fortunately I did, seeing as I worked there. I've got offered that role, and that was a bit of a hybrid role between the office and ships. So I spent about 6 months introducing an electronic muster system, which I know everyone absolutely loved, and all of my friends have given me glowing reviews of how much they enjoyed it when I came and taught them that, and caused absolutely no problems ever. And
it's still causing no problems.
Yeah, I can imagine. And then when that finished after about 6 months because it was just a project. And then I went to join the operations support team, which was known as Orca in Carnival, which had been set up by Nathaniel, your good self. So yeah, I did that for about a year and a half. And James joined during that time, which was very nice. So that's the origin story here.
Yeah.
And then
we can't start with the origin story. That's a spin-off. That's
that's a good point.
10 episodes down the line.
That's a good point. Now what are we going to flash back to in episodes gone by? Rookie error. So we also went together, and then I decided that it was time for me to make a move. I wasn't, much as I was never completely set on going into the maritime industry in the first place, I was never completely set on cruising. And I decided that actually I really liked sort of the training side of things. I really cared about sort of doing things that trying to make a difference for seafarers. And so 2021, I moved to the MCA to do training and policy, policy for training and certification, and been there ever since. But in 2022, I joined the Coming Ashore program as a volunteer mentor, where we get signed different mentees who are looking to make that move ashore, like we all have, and just try and really help them and give them advice and formulate what they want to do with their careers.
I've been sat here listening, but not saying much. I've been letting Nat ask you and grill you with all these questions so far. But it's as you were telling your story there, Will. The reality for those listening who may not know is that it is really tough on board sometimes. If it's not an environment that you're happy with, it's really tough on board. Even if you do like it, you'll have your bad days, you'll have your bad weeks, and you just want to go home, but you can't because you're living in your office. So, but what I think that, I don't want to call it the system, that makes it sound negative, but going through your cadetship and going through university, you're taken on that journey where you're made to feel like you have to enjoy it. That if you don't, something's wrong. And because, as you said, so there's people around you who do love it and they do really get on with it. And I think I was trying to think in silence there whether there's a question in this or whether it's more of just an observation, but it's just that's okay. I think that's fine. It's breaking that stigma of, if it's not for you, there's so many people shoreside who go through degrees and they start career paths that are not for them, and so they just move on to something else. But why is it seen as such a challenger? Almost there's almost a layer of negativity around it, that you've trained all to become a deck officer, but you actually decide 2 years into it you don't want to do that anymore. I think it's it can be tough, but I guess, you know, I would be interested to know if there are people listening, what advice you would offer to them if they felt unhappy in that environment, but it also there's this fiber within them that they feel like they're letting, you know, that they can't move away from it almost.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, you know, it's probably not one that's, as you say, it's probably not it's not unique to the maritime industry. I can't imagine it's anything where you've trained and it's that sunk cost bias, isn't it? Where you think, oh, I've spent this amount of time, I've spent 3 years of my life, and then for every year that you then spend, because it is that structured career pathway, for every year you spend in that pathway, it's more sunk cost, and the more you feel like you're almost destined, or you feel like you owe the career something, which, you know, I think everyone who's been through the career, you know, you owe the career something, in that, you know, it's given you some form of something in your life, whatever that is. But equally, you don't owe it your life, as in your life is for you to live, and if it's not the right career for you, then it's not. So I mean, I think one thing that I wish I had more awareness of when I was at sea was I wasn't really self-aware enough. I hadn't really got to that stage of how I really felt, and for a long time, and it did take me probably longer than it would now to realize that I was unhappy, and that it wasn't just that, you know, I wasn't enjoying it as other people. It was that I was unhappy and I didn't want to be there. But I guess that would be the advice that I would give, would be try and be self-aware, and, you know, check in with yourself. It's easier to say than do, and you know, we're not going to be able to give all the advice on how to do that in the next 5 or 10 minutes. But, you know, do your best to keep an eye on yourself, keep an eye on others around you, but make sure that what you're doing is making you happy. You know, I used to get passengers ask me a lot on board. They would always say, oh, do you want to be a captain one day? Or, like, you know, what's your ambition? You know, what rank do you want to get to? And I always sort of half jokingly said that, you know, I wanted to be happy. I didn't really care where I got to. I said, if I get to second officer and I'm happy, then I'll stop there. If I don't get to second officer and I'm happy, or whenever I'm not happy, I'll stop. And as it was, I didn't get beyond third officer. I did 2 years, I wasn't happy, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to stop there. And I think I'm glad that I did that. But, you know, it does get tougher and tougher to do. And, you know, you see people who stay a long time and they get to a point where they're unhappy. And, you know, there are not infinite, but there are multiple benefits to working in the sea. You know, you don't pay tax if you're out of the country for more than half the year. It's a good wage. You get good leave periods. And people can be scared to leave that. Me and a couple of friends always called it the golden handcuffs, because, you know, you're sort of signing away your life and locking yourself up for, and unhappy, but for something that is giving you lots of benefits. So I'd just say, be aware of yourself and make sure you're happy and you're not stuck in the golden handcuffs. And because there are opportunities out there, but you just need to make sure you try and take the one that makes you the happiest. And none of them are going to be perfect, but if you're not happy, at least try and find one that, you know, makes a change that makes you at least a little bit happier.
Yeah, I think people I've spoken to who have felt the same compare those golden handcuffs, as you say, to sort of the rat race in the city, right? You get used to a standard element of living, and even if you're unhappy, you feel obliged to continue down that path, of that career path, even if it is making you unhappy, because it's sustaining everything that, rightly or wrongly, is making you happy outside of work. And it is a big step, but yeah, an interesting insight and answer. Thanks, Will.
You could probably sum it up in that: how many times have you had a conversation? Oh, how was your leave? Never. So no such thing as a bad leave, is there?
No.
Like, no one ever has had time off, and everyone's a bit more melancholic on that first week back on board, aren't they? Even if they love it, I think it's still that. It's
the adjustment, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's difficult to go between, and that's what I said. I was referring to earlier. I found that change between the two lives very, very difficult sometimes.
Yeah, it's really, really tough to flip that switch, especially when you come home, right? And all your friends who haven't been to sea have got their 9-to-5 job, and actually there kind of is no one around to enjoy that leave period with necessarily. If you're kind of younger, freer, single, you've kind of got to really make your own path for that time off, right?
And I'm mindful that we're going down a path here of making it out that working at sea is terrible, and I don't want it to get too down in the dumps, because as we've said it before on other podcasts, but there are, for some people it's right, and I think the three of us sat here together have to acknowledge that we've all made the move because it wasn't right for us, or we had to make that move. But in the future, we will have people who are still working at sea on the podcast. And so don't worry, it's not all going to be doom and gloom.
It's very true
about seafaring in the future, I promise.
It's very true. There is an inherent bias here.
Yes.
Already.
Yeah.
So given your experience and you took that very bold step of resigning so that your last day on board was your last day with the company. Would you do that again? And if you didn't, what advice would you give someone who is looking to make that leap ashore?
Yes, I would still, if I had the opportunity, knowing what I know now, I would still do that. I think that you said it when we interviewed you, that you got to be open to opportunities, and I think that I knew at that point I was going to be open to opportunities, and I know now that I try to be. So if you have to be a bit willing to compromise. Might not necessarily be the right role, but yeah, I definitely would have done that. But look, as you say, that there are resources out there that can help people. I'm going to do a shameless plug, which is to plug the Coming Ashore program. Obviously being a mentor and hosting this podcast for it, I clearly think very highly of it, but I think it's a really good resource. It's free to join. And the idea is that we match you up with a mentor who will be from one of many backgrounds, but will hopefully have the experience in an area that you're looking to go into. And in reality, it's just someone to bounce ideas off of. It's quite at least the way that I do it, we're quite informal with it, but we just make it that you can talk to us about what that transition's like, that move from ship to shore, help you understand what kind of roles are out there, what you might be interested in. There's also loads of really good resources. We get access to CV reviews. So if you want to have that taken a look at, there's some free courses that we can provide through it that can help you sort of understand the industry a bit more, or look into different skills which maybe you haven't considered before. So yeah, I think that's a really good resource. So if you're thinking about making that move, and I know it's something that I would have liked to have used when I made that choice to come ashore, and probably would have given me a bit more of a safety net, knowing that there was someone else out there looking out for me and helping me through that move.
A little bit of a safety net's always it's nice to have it, isn't it? It's good to obviously be promoting that and saying that this is an opportunity, this is something that is out there, this is a tool.
Yes, I mean, I think as well, just on that, you go through the college and it teaches you all about the spectrum of what you can do on board a ship,
Mm.
but doesn't actually touch on beyond that. And for some people, for all of us, for example, and I'd say for a majority of seafarers, that's one chapter in your career path in the maritime sector. And actually coming ashore, it can be overwhelming, the amount of options available, but also you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes you just need a bit of a steer into, have you considered this avenue? Have you considered that? So I think the more that as a community we talk about that, and I think the Coming Ashore offers the structure to facilitate those conversations, the better, because it's not strictly all laid before you, and it can be quite a complicated network of skills to navigate. I remember when I first was looking at Coming Ashore, I wanted to be a marine superintendent, but I didn't actually know what a superintendent was. I'd never heard of it before, but it just was like, people like that's what most people go into, and so that's what I considered to be the right thing. But until I kind of applied some criticality to it, I was like, I don't actually, it's just got the word marine in it, so I think that's why I should do it. So yeah, really encourage people to get on the program, and if anything, just to have a chat with people who have gone through it before you, and learn from their mistakes.
Yeah, I think we touched on it a bit earlier as well, about the fact that seafaring is quite regimented in career progression, and in reality, regardless of whether you're moving industry or not, if you've got your officer of the watch ticket, you can say, right, okay, I'm going to apply for an officer of the watch role. Or if you've got your chief mates or your second engineers, you can go, I'm going to apply for a role that requires that. So it's quite easy to know what level role you should be looking at. But as you say, we know that, and I'm sure everyone listening knows that there are plenty of fairly nondescript shoreside roles where the title doesn't really say anything within it, and in reality you've got to form what you do within the role itself, and so from coming from a position where you're like, well, I know I'm going to be a third officer, and so that means I'm going to do this and this, to being, I'm going to be a technical advisor, which is my current role. What does that mean? And in reality, it's ended up meaning that I do a lot of things that I'm very interested in. But if I had just read that, I'd gone, God, I've got no idea. So yeah, having that sort of guiding hand would certainly be useful, and yeah, definitely would have found it useful.
So keeping with that theme, then, is there anything that you would want the wider industry or public or prospective employers for seafarers coming ashore? Is there anything you'd like them to know about seafarers before one walks in through their door with a CV?
Yeah, I guess I'd say not to underestimate them. Most seafarers, just from the setup of the current educational system, means that they won't necessarily have a degree. That's changing now. We're starting to see more degree courses offered. But the transferable and soft skills that they'll have would make them a useful asset. So don't prejudge them off of that. Naturally, from working on a ship in an enclosed environment, you get a lot of good teamwork skills. You've got to learn how to communicate well. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to keep the ship running. You work to very tight deadlines to make sure that your ship's got to get to port on time. And if it doesn't, then there's all sorts of repercussions, no matter which part of the industry you work on, whether that's screaming passengers or delayed payment. And you're working under great pressure as well. You think about you're in charge of either an engine that's going to keep a massive tanker running. If then something goes wrong, you could endanger the entire ship, or you're like we were navigating a cruise ship with 3,000 people on board. So a lot of pressure to deal with, and just in general, coming back to that point around being cut off and the teamwork in that sort of environment that is built, it means that you have to get on with it, and you have to be able to problem solve, because you're in the middle of the ocean, and if you can't fix it on board and work together to fix it, then you're going to be in a bit of trouble. So I think just they're resourceful, good team working, and just don't underestimate them just because maybe they don't have a degree, and be willing to look into their deeper meta and interpersonal skills, I'd say.
And for people listening, it's worth drawing those things out, I think, as well, and making them obvious to employers in the CV, because the industry is so niche. I think that people would look at an officer watch ticket and or chief mates or even masters and not really understand the scope of what that means. So it's worth spelling that out for those recruiters or for those managers who are doing that CV sift. Really try and pull it out and make it obvious to them. Unfortunately, that is all we've got time for today. So thank you very much for joining us, Will.
Thank you for interviewing me.
And thank you everyone for listening. From all of us at the Coming Ashore podcast, we hope you've enjoyed this episode and you'll join us for the next one.